Hi, thank you so much for joining us for developing your PLN. I'm Jonathan Warner. I am one of the 5 MLTI ambassadors for the rest of this school year and next school year. I live in Portland, where I am today, and before I joined DOE was the technology integrator at Cape Elizabeth Middle School in Cape Elizabeth, Maine.
And I'm Kate Meyer. I am also one of the MLTI ambassadors, and I am based in Ellsworth, Maine. And prior to my work with the Maine DOE, I was an English teacher and a design thinking teacher at Mount Desert Island High School in Bar Harbor.
So we're going to look today at this first aspect of technology integration into your classrooms from kind of the broader perspective of how do you develop the skill set that you want to use, and how do you locate resources and information that you're going to need as you go forward in this process. So while the other 3 sessions in this 4-part series will look at the actual tools and ways that you might practice with your students or inform your practice with your students, this is kind of a meta session looking at how you would develop your advisory group and the people, how you find the individuals who will help influence your practice and improve your tech integration going forward. So that group of people is usually referred to as a PLN, meaning professional learning network, but that also sometimes refers to personalized or personal learning network. All 3 are interchangeable for our purposes, and we'll look at what they are and how they function and why having one is valuable. But we wanted to start both with our contact information here on the bottom. If you have questions about this, we'd love to talk to you about it. Feel free to reach out to one, the other, or both of us. And this is part of the MLTI ambassador work in these 3 areas. So we're asked to focus on digital citizenship, on technology integration, and then on digital instructional design. And to some degree, I think today's session applies to all 3 of those, because developing your PLN is about finding a diversity of people and voices who influence your work. And presumably these 3 areas are all going to be parts of what you're working on, perhaps with the greatest focus today on the center one, technology integration. But as you'll see over the course of today and all 4 sessions, these are also, the PLN is going to touch on both digital citizenship, education, and digital instructional design. So as I said, 3 areas of focus today. What is a PLN by definition, and sort of what comprises one, what do they look like, why you would have one, and how they function to improve your practice. And then how do you go about utilizing the group of people once you've developed it to transform your teaching? And we'll take a look at each of those, but we wanted to start with kind of a disclaimer. I came to develop my PLN through Twitter. So as I'm speaking, when I say the word Twitter, I am not meaning per se Twitter. I mean more broadly social media connections and digital connections to people who inform your practice. So as I say that word, if it has some kind of negative connotation to you, you think I'm never going to be a person on Twitter, this is not what I'm talking about. I don't mean the what color is your dress theory of Twitter. That's how I first understood it, and I definitely approached it with some serious trepidation about, I'm not really clear why anyone would be on this platform as anything other than, sort of fluffy content. And obviously the dress is black, right, Kate?
I thought it was blue, but yes.
Damn it. Okay. What we also discover, of course, is this is just loaded the other day after the Met Gala. You can still obviously get to this content. So when we're saying Twitter, we're not saying that this isn't there. Unfortunately, just like the other platforms, it's been inundated with advertising, and there's going to be all kinds of algorithmically created content for you. But the fact that it's there doesn't mean that that's what it is. That isn't what defines it. So we're going to hopefully give you some tools for sifting through and getting rid of the what color is that dress theory, and instead look at it as a tool which you can mine for resources if you know how to look. But as I said, we're not limiting that to the concept of Twitter per se. So if for you, Pinterest is a better place to focus. If for you, Facebook is a better place to focus, something that Kate will talk about in a little bit, great. We are more than happy to have you think about our use of the word Twitter to mean the social media platform of your choice. You might also find that some digital publications are useful. So Tech and Learning is a terrific one that you may use to find individuals who speak to you. So I know Kate's been really influenced by, now I can't think of her name, the woman who runs your Facebook group.
Betsy Potash.
Betsy Potash. So maybe you find someone like Betsy Potash or someone that really, Eric Scheninger for me, who has written in this publication, and now that's your way in to locate them. Great. This is absolutely a both and situation. Maybe it's multiple platforms. Maybe you're looking at something that's a resource website. This is George Lucas's Education Foundation publication or web resource collection called Edutopia. Invariably, I find such valuable stuff in there, and I just keep linking it back to who's writing it, who's creating it, and then adding those people to my network. And one of our colleagues, Holly, mentioned that Eric actually said it, that he was assigned to create a cabinet, I think, 10 people around his personal table who would advise him. And not that he knows them personally, but he collects those people in a digital room, and they're the ones he looks to for advice. It was part of a graduate project that he was working on. And I thought that was a really nice way to think about it, that you're developing a cabinet of advisors, and that cabinet's going to be fluid. Some people come in, some people go out, but these are all ways to find the people who are going to sit in those digital chairs. Kate reminded me that Reddit is a terrific place to look, not just for conspiracy theory, but also for terrific content-driven, pedagogy-driven, issue-driven, people sharing through what otherwise is often thought of as, I guess, more of like an under the radar series of conversations, and yet this one works really beautifully if you find the right resources. YouTube, phenomenal. I often tell the story of the woman I introduced to YouTube to learn how to do certain knitting patterns. She had not conceptualized YouTube as a learning platform. She thought of it as, again, as I did about Twitter, as content absorption. And instead, here she was doing asynchronous learning, and from that became really fascinated in it as both a teaching tool and as a resource to find other educators. But there are wonderful channels and playlists that people have developed, and again, you're looking at it as not as defined by the typical definition. So YouTube is not often where one might think to find professional development, but it is there. And so what we hope to be able to do is give you the tools to find those resources. Hashtags, which we'll look at in a little bit, where you don't need to, they're platform neutral in many cases. In other words, if you know the hashtag you're looking for, it'll get you to all kinds of terrific content across multiple sharing platforms. And that can be a really great entry point to find these people. Maybe you'll find that they're represented in multiple platforms, but we'll really encourage you to let go of the assumption that you have to have every one of these accounts or every one of these, a comfort level with every one of these platforms. It's really just whichever bite at the apple makes the most sense to you. Kate found a podcast by Betsy Potash that was really powerful for her, that also demonstrated the way that if you like this, you may also like this, can get you algorithms used to your advantage instead of to sell you something. And suddenly you're finding a group of really smart educators who are podcasting, and that's the way you consume the content. One of our great heroes, John Spencer, talks about how he has now moved his home 20 minutes away from school, and every morning on his walk to school, he listens to a different podcast. And that's how he sort of does his morning get into the frame of reference. And I think that's a terrific example of how you might do this. We're joking. They're like, what is this tactic? I don't know what that is. That is a symbol for TikTok if you've never seen it. And much to my surprise, a really terrific resource as well, where teachers are sharing their ideas in these short formats. What was it when you said might not work very well, Kate? Oh, Snapchat.
Instagram, Snapchat. Yeah, I just don't know much about Snapchat. It wasn't a platform that I got into, but because they disappear, I suspect there's probably not a massive learning community out there, although there might be. I'm flying under the radar as it is.
Did you know that there are librarians who use it as a way to get messages out about, like, there's a new book collection, right? But I do think, especially as you'll see today, we emphasize the asynchronous quality of this and the fact that you can always go back to it. Maybe that's not really the right place, but Kate did mention Instagram, which is terrific as well. Both Pinterest and Instagram have a very visual content if they're not platforms you use, so photograph or image based. And if you're someone who's thinking about designing your classroom or thinking about, for an area that I never thought of before, an amazing series of Pinterest boards for library displays. And my colleague, who's the high school librarian, routinely mines her Pinterest account for ideas for displays in our high school library, and they are phenomenal. I think one of the basic tenets of developing the PLN is getting away from the idea that you have to invent it yourself, and that as educators, so often we are literally reinventing the wheel, where instead we could be standing on someone else's shoulders and really developing better ideas based on great ideas, or more tailored or more customized ideas. But so often people are just resetting to zero. And I think the idea of the PLN is jump up on someone's shoulders, use the ladders that they've created, and go from there to excellence, instead of having that long delta where you're waiting for kind of getting your feet underneath you or figuring something out. And especially true for tech in classrooms, where someone, Alice Keeler, like, has figured out how to do it in Google Classroom for you. Do not bang your head against the wall. In the immortal words of a great book, go ask Alice, see what she has to say. I mentioned a moment ago too that hashtags are a particularly good way to do this. But if you go to twitter.com, you'll get the screen. I actually should have had it, but I don't, that says, please log in. And you have the impression that you have to have a Twitter account to access the content. That is a lie. You do not. This is my page for a friend of mine, Jenny Majera. Her tweets, her materials showing as a logged in page. So you can see here on the bottom, I'm logged in. Exact same page from a window that was not logged in, looks like this. Remarkably similar. The one thing that's missing is over here on the left-hand side, we got rid of some of the possibilities for curation, something we'll talk about here, but you don't get your notifications because that reflects what people have done to interact with you. And if you don't have an account, they can't. Messages, bookmarks, lists, and your profile go away. But by and large, the only thing that's going to change is if you look right there, you'll see that you get a login option here, but it's not requiring that I do that to see Jenny's content. So in the same way, she uses this hashtag courageous adventures. And if I Google her with Jenny, if you look on the top there, Jenny Majera Twitter, that's my Google search. The first thing that comes up is her Twitter account. And when I click on it, and again, I'm not logged in to this particular window that you're seeing, I go to that screen we just saw. If I do the same thing with her hashtag, I don't even need to put in Twitter. And in fact, I would encourage you not to, because you may find that it pops up in multiple platforms. So I put in Courageous Adventures. I go right into the Twitter feed of people who have used that tag for their content. And then I get this series of choices. And excuse me, I wanted to emphasize the window that appears top, latest, people, photos, and videos is 5 different searches of the same hashtag. So the hashtag represents a concept people want to share. And Kate, do you mind saying about, you mentioned to me that your sense was that people may not clearly conceptualize how they operate?
Right. So when you use a hashtag, you're actually entering into a larger conversation. And so that's what you'll see if you start to Google, for example, courageous adventures. What it does is it compiles all of the posts that get hashtagged with that same hashtag together. So you really are, as Jonathan mentioned, if you look at top latest people photo videos, people who have posted a video and then hashtagged it courageous adventures, it will get put into that bucket. So when you're using a hashtag, I mean, I often use them in my social media, but kind of to be funny and say, you kind of say the unsaid with a hashtag, right? But what you're doing is you're joining a conversation about the unsaid by using that hashtag. So it really is, you're entering into a larger conversation, and it is a way of organizing on the internet that conversation.
Yeah, you mentioned that too. It reminds me that it acts like a filter. So it's almost like an additional search term in a filtered search process. And I should say that at the top level, so at the Google level, you're going to see anything anyone has tagged. And unfortunately, the more popular hashtags get co-opted by businesses, by trolls, and you'll have to weed through that a little bit. But especially if you find one that is really specific to your work, and we'll share a bunch of examples with you over the course of this session, you'll find that it really does serve as a locus and a touchstone for all this different kind of content. If you perform the search in Google and go into Twitter, the window you're seeing on the bottom half of the screen is once I've gotten into Twitter. And so it is in this screen, it would be as if I did the search right here. So the result is that those 5 categories all are going to have the same tag. As Kate mentioned, all the videos with the tag will appear in the furthest right of those buttons. But I would urge you to get out of top and into at least latest. Top is going to be the most algorithmically driven. So once you find the hashtag, if your initial landing point in Twitter is going to be top, meaning most popular, meaning most likely to have inserted content from the algorithm saying things like promoted tweet, or don't you want to know more about this great pair of Spanx that you searched the other day? You might get back to dresses unintentionally. We're going to help you avoid that. So switch over to the second tab, latest, and you'll get a reverse chronological search of that hashtag. And then people is a terrific method of finding people to add to your professional learning network. So when we talk about the professional learning network, we are talking about people, but how you find the people might include a hashtag. So now if I click on people, the first person who's going to come up is Jenny, because she created this hashtag, she uses it all the time. And then you'll see one or more additional people who frequently use it. So if you find a group of individuals who you like using that and who you're impressed by or sort of, taken with using that hashtag, the people search is now getting rid of tweets, that is getting rid of individual posts, and instead taking you to people who themselves have used that pretty frequently. That reminds me too to say that one of my huge misconceptions about Twitter was that the actual, at the time, 120 characters, or now 240, was what mattered. And it is not the case. That is merely a lily pad to get to your actual destination. So what people are posting, especially for the purposes of a PLN, is an organized way to find resources. But the resources are not contained. I mean, there's some that are like pithy, you can do this, or you're raising great kids. But the sensibility of the content of the tweet being what you're looking for, it was a misconception on my part. And what it actually is the person digesting their thought into something shareable in the short content that is itself almost like a mini advertisement or a mini description of the actual content, which is linked. And unlike, I will say this is one shortcoming of Instagram, it's not necessarily, it's for a different purpose. Instagram is set up to not allow posts to contain links. And you'll see if you look at Instagram, it often says link in bio. So you have to back out to the overall account to find any links. That is not the case in Twitter and Facebook. So both of those platforms will permit you as a user to insert content in the form of a link. And as a result, you can click immediately in the tweet or Facebook post to get to that. So not something wrong with Instagram per se, but you may find if you want more than the visual content, Instagram is comprised of photos, that you may want to use it in addition to some of these other platforms, because in that case, the post is itself the content. And I think that distinction is a good one to have in mind, that by using this filter of a hashtag or using a particular person's account, you're not limited to what they're expressing. You're gaining access to their expression of larger ideas that you can access elsewhere. This session has been created in response to Mount Desert Island's AOS 91's effort to explore high impact teaching. And so we wanted to specifically name two of the aspects of today's work that will connect to two concepts that have been raised through that framework. So if you're looking at or you have access to the high impact teaching framework handout that MDI provided, number 3 addresses content. And it talks about the teacher as a facilitator who creates structures that facilitate student-directed learning. That is our goal today. Kate and I are not trying to give you the content per se. We're trying to give you, though hopefully we'll provide some of that, we're trying to provide you a skill set and a series of tools that facilitate your learning, but we are not sharing times and dates and all those sort of traditional, though we are the two speaking, we're not trying to lecture to you to gain the content. It is intentionally asynchronous, so you can pause and do the searching on your own. It is intended to be a skill set development process today, not a content absorption process. Similar to that, the book High Impact Teaching that is central to the AOS 91's conversation talks about constructivist instruction and introduces it from the perspective of how it works to be a high impact teaching strategy. But it also struck me as we were talking and preparing for today that its definition of facilitating, that is constructivist instruction's definition of facilitating autonomy, encouraging initiative, creating opportunities for dialogue, and nurturing and sort of welcoming the student curiosity and shifting away from the concept that I'm going to be the sage on the stage, that my goal becomes and my role becomes offering responsive teaching. Obviously, in this asynchronous construct, I can't do that today. Kate and I are sort of guessing at what your needs are, but with the goal that you are now finding responsive content, finding resources that are going to meet your direct needs and that are, I guess, dynamic. They're not, it's not a fixed series. And in my case, I intentionally kind of shake up my PLN from time to time, add some people and take some people out that have been less influential for a period of time, and then make that part of the process to respond to whatever current need I have going on. As a kind of mini test of how my PLN was working, I thought, oh, let's see what they have to say about these two concepts, about high impact teaching and about constructivist instruction. And lo and behold, in about a minute, I located 3 different resources. So each of these, when you have access to the slides, which you will at the end of this session, or which are presumably in the link to or the description of this video, see link in bio. These 3 are terrific digested versions of high impact teaching, the relationship between high impact teaching and student empowerment, a version of constructivist teaching, which is the 5E model, and then an advocacy piece in what is one of my favorite website publications, Teach Thought, where the argument is made that group work and constructivism as a small group can be really valuable. That goes for students, certainly, but we'll talk in a little bit too about how that might work for adults, and that constructivist teaching and group communal construction of understanding can be a terrific way to get into developing a PLN. Anything I missed in there, Kate?
No, that was great.
Thank you. So what is a PLN? Let's define it, having said much about it. It does sound like jargon, another one of those fantastic education, ridiculous acronyms that never have any real meaning. The PLN is something that really offers a sense of community with people you don't know, at least don't know at first, and who resonate for you as smart and thoughtful and humorous and insightful, and who really invigorate you to feel like you can get up the next morning and go back to this work not totally on your own. And Kate and I both talked about how we really enjoy closing our classroom doors and doing our thing, right? Like that's a great aspect of our work, but it is profoundly isolating when, and all the more so by remote instruction, that you can just lose all perspective and all sense of energy around this. And the sensibility that you can have a group of people around you who offer a combination of moral support and professional concepts and introduction to new ideas. It isn't new, but what's new-ish is the way and the breadth of access you can have to those people using some of these digital tools. So Sarah Thomas, I met because very foolishly, she was presenting at a conference and I was one of two people who attended, and the three of us got to know each other really well in the course of the 90-minute presentation. And she went on in 6 months to win ISTE's national recognition for teaching with diversity as the diversity, equity, and inclusion as the central aspect of the teaching. So their loss was my gain. I got to know her in that period of time and we've remained in touch. She's this terrific, energetic educator from the Virginia, Maryland, Washington, D.C. region. She's taught in really challenging circumstances in urban schools, and teaching in Cape Elizabeth, I don't have any experience like hers on a daily basis. And not that I'm living vicariously through her, but what she sees in her classroom and what she talks about in her social media feed and provides access to has been profoundly influential in my thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion issues, which we are really struggling with in Cape. And so having the ability to directly access her thinking on a regular basis whenever I need it is really a wonderful addition to my toolbox, or to the things that I have available to me. And one of her comments here that I think is really interesting is that traditional professional development, where someone is telling you what they know for you to utilize, might have overlap between, it might overlap with the people or the concepts in your professional learning network that you want to explore. But the assumption is that you care about the content. And we have all been to that incredibly problematic waste of time and money, where someone has a really great idea that they would like to share to the large group, but it has no bearing whatsoever on you, or it is offered during, I don't know, maybe the end of semester where you're trying to put grades together. And perhaps it's a little difficult to focus on their very passionate advocacy for outdoor education, right? I'm all for it. But in that moment, it's a total disconnect between what I'm worried about, which is the midwinter blues and my need to get my grades in. So that immediacy, or that topical quality, makes your engagement as someone developing a PLN the magic that the subject matter that might exist in traditional professional development is valuable, but in that moment transforms it from, we talked about that file cabinet you had in your classroom filled with great handouts that you never actually use. This vitiates the need for the guilt and the sort of sense of like, oh, well, I'm probably sitting there somewhere, but I can't find it. The hashtag is the way to find it. The PLN is the immediate resource giving you access to it. And the reason you're looking is because you have a need for it right now. And no better way to learn, right? No better way to really internalize something than to put it in place in response to a need. We'll look at several of these today. These are infographics or sketch notes created by Sylvia Duckworth. You can see her handles down here. She's hilarious and really, really creative in the way that she captures ideas about educational issues. And her work with PLNs has resulted in a number of these sketch notes that I thought were great summaries or sort of introductory pieces for us to look at. I mentioned one of the aspects of my PLN, which is access to people I wouldn't have access to otherwise. It has given me, in my case, they're mostly national contacts. I have a few international, but for many world language teachers, for example, the PLN offers them contacts around the world. And one of the Spanish teachers in my middle school, shout out to Susan Dana, this year's award winner for Foreign Language Association of Maine Educators of the Year, FLAME. Congratulations, Sue. She has a classroom in Latin America that she's partnered with for years that she found through her PLN. She got to actually visit them in person and get to know the teacher. And her students learning Spanish and the teacher in, I believe it's Paraguay, that classroom and its teacher are constantly in Zooms and exchanging with one another. They were in Skype all the time back when that was the common platform, and teaching each other in their native language, listening and speaking in the learned language, doing projects together. They do this awesome monster project where they each write stories in their learned language about a monster that they've created, then they share them with each other and they critique each other, all accessed and found through Sue's PLN. So that kind of global community piece can be invaluable to people. But for me, certainly the national perspective has been really eye-opening and really changed my practice, as I'll talk a little bit more about in detail in a minute. But it also is this bottomless pit of positive, I'll say bottomless well of resources. It never runs out. As long as you find a PLN that is constantly engaged and sort of developing content and engaging in ideas, you're going to have a place to go to bounce ideas off of, or at least to get a mirror to look at and figure out whether or not your perspective or your take on something might have other aspects that you haven't thought about. I think one of the things I love about Maine is its small town feel. It is, being from New York originally, the state is the smallest town I've ever lived in. People are just constantly like, oh, I know, if you say about New York City, oh, you're from New York City, do you know John? It's a joke, right? But in Maine, the other joke is like, do you know John? Oh yeah, actually I do. He's my neighbor down in, we have a summer house next to each other, camp up in Aroostook County. So that sensibility of community here cuts us off sometimes from other perspectives and other people's experiences. And my PLN has kept me connected to what are very different points of view. And I'll show you some examples too of this, but I work really hard to keep in my PLN people, not that I fundamentally disagree with or who I think of as crackpots, but who have different takes on things. I gave the example the other day during a conversation about, I follow several charter school accounts and advocates for charter schools, not because I find I have a personal investment in charter schools. In fact, I'm not a fan of them, but what they offer in their social media shares are perspectives about meeting the needs of uniquely defined populations. And that to me can be really valuable. And they also push at my assumptions sometimes in ways that I find refreshing. So I'll encourage you as you develop your PLN not to limit it to just the people you would nod along with, but to some people, especially once you start to really use your PLN, who would challenge you and get you away from what might otherwise be a confirmation bias, right? And telling you, patting you on the back for what you already are aware of. One of the other advantages that I think is great about PLNs is that you get to model for students and for colleagues your own curiosity and exploration. So you, by striving to be better, by looking for things you might not have seen before, Kate will talk about this in the context of some texts that she's taught, it really is giving people access to the idea that we are not static, right? We have not just the capacity, but the interest in changing. And it gives us an alternative to what I have found to be incredible waste of time and money, where large groups of people who lack common interest are gathered into a room together and told what to think. And the chances of that influencing your teaching and transforming your experience with students, and more importantly, your students' experience, are virtually zero, right? There's no likelihood that that's going to be incorporated into your work. What is the point of professional development if it doesn't develop you? So these two individuals, and you'll see I did this throughout the slides, I'm going to give you their handle, their name, and then just 10 characters about what they are. So Sharon is an ELL teacher, and Allison teaches computer science. Both of them are people that I follow in my PLN. I get a lot of information from them, and they are very different in their work. So I'm a tech integrator, but their experiences have either enough commonality with me or enough sort of thoughtful engagement with the work of teaching that I really want to keep learning from them. So these are all suggestions of people you might explore. They might be good matches for you, they might not. But the handle here. So if you've not done this, the hashtag, the number sign is a concept, whereas the @ is a person. It's their account, and we refer to it as their handle. So mine is at Main School Tech. These are each handles that people have developed. I was telling Kate that I was trying to pronounce this as a single word, and Allison actually has 3 kids, Ted, Rose, and Cece. And once I met her and found that out, her handle made a great deal more sense to me. The part that I found maybe most compelling about developing PLNs came from an observation that Carl Hooker made in a session he was doing at a conference I was at in Boston a few years ago. And you remember conferences, right? So it was one of those where we were in person learning. And he talked about the concept of Samur. And for our purposes today, we don't need to know more about this other than that it is a model that describes ways to integrate technology into a classroom, and whether you use the technology as a substitute for something that would otherwise be analog, whether the technology augments your teaching, whether it modifies or you modify your teaching using technology, or in the case of my friend Sue, the classroom in Paraguay, it redefines her teaching because the technology makes something possible that otherwise wouldn't be. So Carl's talking about this, but he paused to say, one of the worst things we can do in professional development is throw everyone in the pool and assume they can all swim, right? That if we are to ask a group of people to get physically fit, we are not going to walk them all up to the edge of a pool, shove them in and say, become healthier, right? Because we have Olympic swimmers and we have people who are going to drown before they take their first stroke. And what our traditional PD models do is say, here is the way you're going to learn this. Here is the thing I am choosing that is important for you. Good luck with that. And there are people for whom I have had those large group instruction sessions that happen like by sort of magic to land designed by someone else about a subject that actually means something to me. And I've gotten something out of them. Or has introduced something that's fresh and sort of new that I've been able to incorporate. But by and large, that's not a model that's going to work, and certainly as the only model you pursue. So Carl's argument was, let's reconsider the basic assumption that the best way to teach us is through old style lecture. We have pretty much universally as a profession rejected sage on the stage teaching as being the only or the best way to teach. And yet we somehow forget that teachers as learners are going to have that same change in their practice or the greater learning if they're better engaged, or there are ways in which the models that are used to help them develop skills are responsive to their learning needs. So the PLN offers not by any means the only way or the single way to pursue that kind of personalized learning, but it does offer an incredibly diverse and dynamic way to explore ideas that you might have otherwise not had access to resources to develop that skill. I often see this one in response to standardized testing, right? This image pops up. And the general idea that we have a group of learners in front of us, and in the instance of standardized testing, those animals represent the students, right? But in this instance, if they're the teachers and the person on the right is your curriculum director, I'm talking to you, Julie, the sense of having a single task or a single method of learning for this group of people is unbelievably unfair, right? And is going to result in a huge range of absorption and utilization by the people that are out there. So what we're encouraging you to think about as you develop a PLN is what works for you. There is no right way. You might have 10 people in yours. You might have, as I do, 200. Some people have thousands. That's what they find to be the most helpful. But as you look for the right alchemy and the mix, find the right platforms, find the right people, find the right hashtags, and create your own soup that is responsive to how you learn. Maybe you're John Spencer, I should say John Spencer, and you listen to podcasts on the way to work as one aspect of it. Then he has said that he uses the podcast to explore ideas he's not familiar with, but he sets up for himself his reading, his books, in an order that he's going to pursue them. And that's very intentional. And he likes having the mix of that intentionality with the more sort of serendipitous, I was going to say surreptitious, more surreptitious PD, but serendipitous PD that's there. Anything there that jumped out to you, Kate?
I was just thinking, as I'm kind of reflecting on this as we do this presentation, as we're running through this today, just how important my PLNs have been to my own professional development. I was thinking about the fact that I'm in this role as an MLTI ambassador and instructional technology coach for the next 2 years, having been an English teacher for my entire career. And I was thinking about how, I went down kind of the rabbit hole of YouTube during 2020 because I had time. And that's where I really started to understand how YouTube could educate me and build my skills up, which led me to a totally different place in my career, 2 short years later. And the pool image, again, it struck me a little differently this morning. And I thought, PLNs via social media are a really safe place to dive right into the deep end, or to enter, via the stairs. Like, really, the entry points are just so wide open, but it is, if you're maybe not a dive in the deep end person, this is a safe and easy way to maybe try that out. Or if you are a dive into the deep end person immediately, that's who I am. There's so much to explore. And so, I was thinking about, sorry, been thinking about a lot of things while you've been going through that section. Even back to section 1, where you were, talking about the different social media platforms. And I was like, oh, well, yep, I use Twitter for the newest and hottest quick tips. I use Facebook for more of a deeper, more granular dive. I use Reddit for those larger global conversations around education policy, right? So I am in a lot of different places that I use for a lot of different things. I'm on YouTube all day long, in between meetings, hopping onto the treadmill, turning on YouTube and learning a new tech tool. And so there are lots of places and lots of different ways to use them. And so it's really deciding what does work best for you as an individual. And that's what I love about using social media for PLNs.
I hadn't thought about that. We both started teaching design thinking, Kate, for longer than I, but I would have not the first clue. I would be like, that sounds cool. And yet I found, speaking of John Spencer, his awesome book, Launch, this is the Bible. Like, literally, I made a gigantic display in my classroom of this concept because it's so accessible to kids. And I was first introduced to the Stanford model of design thinking, which is awesome, but about as penetrable to a 5th grader as, I don't know, Moby Dick. So I had the sense of like, how am I ever going to get this to them? And then Eureka, my PLN's like, I've got the book for you. And he has website, he has videos. We'll see a screenshot of one in a little bit, but John is just he seems to know something about everything and be smart about all of it, and meanwhile I have kids and a life. But anyway, I envy him and his skill set. What he offers in so many different areas is invaluable to me. But I suspect there are people who jump on and are like, oh, that's not really my thing, right? Great, move on. And Kate said at the beginning, which you just mentioned, there's no risk, right? You're not in a classroom for 90 minutes thinking to yourself, oh my God, I don't want to speak, I don't want to speak, I don't want to speak. And that anxiety is preventing you from taking anything in, right? There's all these different methodologies, and it's like the ultimate PD buffet where you can engage as deeply and jump in as quickly as you want, it's the risk. I hadn't thought about it. It's with no risk, because the only thing that's going to happen is you'll discover for yourself that wasn't effective and maybe you wasted some time, right? But then you learn what not to do. And as we tell our kids, right, that the M word of mistake is the invaluable place where actual learning takes place. And maybe it also makes you think, wow, I've been using this tool to make this happen for my kids, and I bet there's some other ways I could do it. So you have these kind of aha moments in the safety of your own home that then become transformative to you, because you connect to that person, hear more from them, and realize, wow, there's a whole area of study that I had not considered. And it is so organic, and I'll use that word several times today, but the magic of it is the way that it is so responsive and can be so responsive. And Kate mentions, the immediacy. You go to your PLN to answer a question like right now, and you get the answer in 90 seconds, like I did with the article about constructivism, or you get a reading list of things to find, or to get to later on. You find a YouTube playlist comprised of multiple different presenters about a single tool, and now you have this deep dive into Jamboard and all the different things it can do that you would not have even known to look at until you found that one person who was like, have you tried Jamboard for this? We joke always about like if only there were a tool that allows you to put Post-its on a digital board. Well, Jamboard is that, but if you've never heard of it, you don't know what it is, that question is totally legitimate. It's not a parody. And yes, there is. And if I can help you find it and learn how to use it, it could be game changing for you. And Kate has talked about how her classroom revolved when it was full remote around Jamboards as a basic sort of everyday tool that without it, could she have done her job? Of course. But was it amplifying messages and replicating things that were norms in her classroom? Yes. And in so doing, making her all the more effective in the process. So that's really where it's so rewarding, where you're like, dude, I did that really well because someone gave me a really good idea and planted a seed and then gave me access to those other places to look. From that, I'll say just this. If it's not working for you, stop. Go a different way. If you're finding that YouTube is not the right platform, or so much of the content in Instagram is distracting, then pull back. There's no commitments to any of these things. And as we're giving you these examples, think of them as stand-ins for what works for you. We're going to tell you what works for us, but that's because we've worked really hard over, I think it's about 7 to 8 years for both of us. Yours actually a little longer. The PLN concept to us is 8 to 10 years old. For you who may be new to this or somewhere between our familiarity and new to it, there are going to be different aspects that make more sense to you. Don't trust your instincts. Don't hold on to something simply because other people are telling you that's a good way to do it. It is the ultimate opportunity to customize for yourself and take advantage of it. Life is too short, the day is too short, and there's too much to do to waste your time on professional development, big group or small, that isn't effective for you. So why have these? I think we've given a pretty good series of arguments about it, but a couple other things to think about. Dr. Tori Trust has done her graduate research around the effectiveness of PLNs as a method of teaching and learning for teachers. And for those of you that are in districts that are resistant to other possible models, I'm about to give you some ammunition for the cannon to your administration to say, hey, maybe we should introduce some other ways to do PD. And one of the ones that has been really transformative in CAPE is we have an annual CAPE-only multi-school ed camp, where over the course of a day, we all get together, we all present to one another, and it is totally self-selected. And I won't say too much more about ed camps. I'll encourage you to Google them if you're not familiar. But the basic principle is the presenters are comprised of people who are attending, and the attendees can immediately become presenters by joining a conversation. And it is completely responsive to what you are interested in studying. So there's no preset agenda. There are some people who have already agreed that they will present if there's an interest in their subject matter. But beyond that, it's really structured around self-explored learning. And it's like a in vivo PLN process where you move around from the various rooms or the various stations. And we got it in place by arguing that it was a better use of time. And really quickly, like after the first one, we're able to substantively and data support the idea that these as a different mode of teaching and learning would be a valuable addition. I know a number of districts now are actually adding PLN exploration time as a part of their PD. And the only product is that you share out what you're learning. Many districts will develop a hashtag for that district's PD, and you contribute to the hashtag. And that's your demonstration of growth using examples from your classroom or resources that you found. And it fulfills both the like, are they really doing what they're supposed to be doing as teachers aspect of, understandably, the need to sort of supervise that at times, but also the real individualization that can happen. So PLNs have a kind of data-driven support that we hope is helpful in either convincing you that they're valuable or convincing others that they're an excellent use of your time. We also know, and this is cited in Dr. Trust's work, that professional development, no matter what it is most effective when it is long-term and collaborative, when it focuses on the learning of all students, and when it's linked to the curriculum that teachers are actually having to teach. That is what changes teacher practice. If the PD is long-term collaborative, focused on as many or the broadest section of your students as possible, and linked to what you are teaching now, and Kate will give a great example of this in a minute, that is when it changes your practice. And if you can articulate to an administrator, can you show me how that changed what we were doing meaningfully versus offering them a suggestion? I had a great principal who said, I would love to hear what's going wrong, but only if you also offer me an alternative, because I need some support in finding out what the better way is to do something. And that's how we got EdCamp introduced. I came to him with one of my colleagues, having been to an EdCamp, and said, can we try this? I feel like it'd be really cool. And it was transformative. And it also transformed people's sensibility, both teacher and administration, that the only way to do this was through large group instruction, the only way to change people's teaching or continue to develop them. That transformation directly reflects this definition that Dr. Trust cites, that there are ways in which your engagement and your empowerment or your efficacy, or what is the word I'm looking for, your agency is going to be really significant in getting away from the file cabinet in your classroom full of cool ideas to actually changing what you do. I'll give you a second just to take a look at this. This is a second one of these Sylvia Duckworth infographic / sketch note ideas. But she, as you notice in the center there, she says, personal or professional, so like us using those terms interchangeably, and suggestions about why you might have one, but also specifically what to do. In other words, how to access some of these possibilities. The sixth one, both Kate and I caught our eye, flatten your classroom walls, without being able to ask Sylvia. She was busy this morning. Though actually we have both had the experience of reaching out. I probably could have tweeted her and been like, Sylvia, what do you mean by flatten your classroom? But instead we have decided what Sylvia means. Sorry, ambulance going by. The concept there would be get rid of your classroom walls, so like bust through them, I think you said, Kate. Break them down so that you are not teaching just within the four walls, but you're having your students access all kinds of things outside your classroom physically, which they can either get to in person, but also, of course, virtually. One of the weird, amazing aspects of the pandemic has been the access people are giving to things that were only in person in the past. And one example that I have been just bowled over by, my daughter's in a French class that now, because of the pandemic, can attend in real time this incredible Parisian film festival that the teacher has used for years, always having to teach the prior year's entries. And for the last 2 years, she's been able to teach this year's entries. And they also do they do like an NAACP, Nope, not an NAACP bracket, an NCAA bracket of music, French music, and they have these songs that compete with one another, and they're listening to radio and the equivalent of French MTV kind of, video VJ style programming to make their choices about current top hits, and that is so much more, engaging, and kind of like the kids are participating in the voting on things that are currently being heard on French radio. That's a really awesome way that you flatten your classroom walls, and their PLN helps you access, because they're like, oh my gosh, did you know that whatever, the film festival now is offering its showings virtual. So quick story. The reason I came to Twitter to find my PLN is because my job description shifted to include work in our school library. So we had 2 school librarians and 2 ed techs who were tech integrators, one of which was me. Grammatically weird. I was one of the tech integrators, and I was an ed tech. With a young family, I needed a professional job, and this 1 year of exploration was really cool, but I was going to have to leave CAPE if I didn't get a teaching position. Not exactly responsive to that, but at the same time, CAPE determined that a better model would be to have a professional tech integrator split between the 2 buildings, the middle school and the high school. But to do that, I was going to have to work out of the library. So suddenly I have to learn a lot of things about library science that I have no access to. I have never been to library school. Between that time and now, I have now taken some graduate level library classes. But what I really needed was, like, really soon, some help developing skills. And one of the suggestions that was made to me was check out social media, see what's going on Twitter. I had, after I got over my "what color's that dress" reaction, started to find hashtags, people, something called the ized Librarians Network, which is, ized is the parent group of ACTM, or statewide computer technology in classrooms group. And the Librarians Network was full of these incredibly generous, hilarious, thoughtful librarians who were in the trenches, practicing in their schools, doing everything from makerspaces to book displays to critical thinking about news media. And each of them was a different kind of resource for me. One of those is Joyce Valenza. She's in the bottom row, one from the left. And she is a luminary. So, like, if you know wine, then of course you know this person who is famous in the wine world. Well, Joyce Valenza, if you know libraries, school libraries, you know Joyce Valenza. She is an incredibly prolific and well-respected school librarian who now teaches the library science program at Rutgers, and is just incredible in terms of her ideas and her accessibility and thoughtfulness about what makes for meaningful school library experiences for kids. So over the course of these 3 years, 2014 to 2017, I get just dazzled by what she has to offer, all the people that she introduces me to virtually, that is. Then I get to meet her at the 2016 ISTE conference. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm totally fanboying Joyce Valenza. She's so nice. She attends one of my sessions that I'm doing and writes about it for School Library Journal. That was pretty crazy. And then in the next year, Knowledge Quest, which is the American Association of School Librarians, AASL's online publication, they create an annual competition. And that year, the AASL Social Media Superstar Leadership Luminary finalist, look who is there. Me, little old me, holy crapola. Joyce Valenza and I are at the same level for this very limited purpose, right? Not like someone's going to come to me and tell me how to, or ask me how to organize their card catalog, or the finer points of the Dewey Decimal System. But they are looking to me for leadership in how school librarians might use social media to tell their stories and to develop their narrative about the work that they're doing to be shared with others. And actually, I've never thought of this before, but one of the reasons I got this job, I've now learned, is that one of our colleagues, who is a permanent employee of the Department of Education, had seen me talk about telling your story, using social media as a way to construct understanding of your program so that you are supported and you're not leaving a vacuum that is then filled with negative space and people being like, what the heck does the school librarian do anyway? So I worked really hard to develop a positive social media presence for our makerspace and for our library and our student tech team. And in doing that, filled a vacuum that was otherwise potentially at risk. You know, we know school librarians are getting cut constantly from budgets. And our colleagues said to me later on, that really landed with me. And I remember thinking when you apply for this job, that's the guy that talked about telling your story in social media. And that's the kind of resonance that my PLN has had. I actually ended up being the president of the school library, the ISTE Librarians Network for a year, and meeting all these people in real life and eventually getting to the White House, which was the most surreal, extraordinary experience in learning from other colleagues about future-ready libraries and modern school library practice, that there was zero chance that would have happened without developing this group of people around me who at first were just sort of faces in social media, then became people I got to know. And as I mentioned or alluded to, were incredibly responsive in ways that I was like, how is that even possible, to my needs, and helping me become really practiced and refined in what I was offering to my students, which is of course what matters. And in the process, I got this unbelievable personal experience to grow and to kind of make me feel as passionately as I do about the power of library work and why it is so critical to kids' learning. That has translated to a different library program in conjunction with my amazing 2 library colleagues at Keep, that I feel like would not have, which I know would not have been possible without that group of people. As you think about how you're going to create your PLN, in my case, the librarian one, I know very well that that's not going to be the one for you, but as you develop the one that makes sense for you from that example, think about these paired questions, both of which came to me from people in my PLN. Martin Morin says, ask yourself, is the focus of the person I'm considering adding or who I've added to my PLN students and or issues for which students are the motive? So keep going back to, is this changing my practice? And to that degree, being a little bit discerning, a little bit kind of careful, not that you're going to make a mistake, as I said, it's just a question of unfollowing or stopping reading someone's work. But keep in mind, are those individuals contributing to a larger thrust of student focus and or student issue focus? And ask yourself, is the addition of that individual adding to the value of my learning, like increasing my understanding, or is it distracting? There are people with great ideas that were in my PLN who made the decision to really merge their personal and professional feeds. And for me, the percentage of personal sharing was more than I wanted in the amount of time I have to devote to my PLN. So that, as an example, as much as it would have been kind of cool to know about them if I knew them personally, they're sharing in that way in the same stream as their professional stream, made it for me more of a distraction. There were some hashtags too that took me down like weird rabbit holes that I could have spent years in. And I thought, you know what, that's actually not germane. It doesn't answer Martin's question about being student focused. And as a result, I'm gonna let that person go. So going back to the cabinet analogy, don't hesitate to invite someone to, move on. They don't need to know, and just put someone else in that chair. That can be a really powerful tool to make the PLN more meaningful to you. And if it isn't really electrifying you in the way that Kate and I are describing, it probably has to do with who's in it and finding some other voices and some other, maybe it's additional voices or maybe fewer, but curating that collection of people to really to feel like at home with them and to feel like they're really speaking to your needs.
Well, and it really goes back to that idea that, the pool, that there's no risk here, so if I'm following someone on Twitter and all of a sudden, what I'm seeing isn't electrifying me. I love that word because as soon as you use it, I'm like thinking about the people I follow. I'm like, check, check, check. Yes, yes, yes. But if they are not electrifying you, unfollow them. And they're not going to get a notification about it. There's going to be no fallout. It's just that person isn't serving you in the same way anymore. And this is your PLN. So feel free, I just say bless and release, unfriend, unfollow, pull yourself out of the group, because they're working for others and your needs change over time. I think about how my PLNs have changed over the past 10 years. I'm not in all the same PLNs that I was 10 years ago. I'm in different ones now, and that's okay.
The idea of bless and release is brilliant. Thank you. That's really good. I was thinking there's no need to write the Dear John letter, right? You don't have to be like, and it's me, it's not you, right? You just walk away. But also I didn't. You chose the theme for these slides of the light bulbs. Nice work there. The light bulbs, right? You're looking for light bulbs. And if they're not lighting up your room, move on. Okay. Characteristics of the PLN. As you think about how you're going to do this, and I promise we're going to give you the tools and some ways to start to find these people, here's what your PLN should look like when we describe it in total, right? Many of which we've referenced. It should give you access to flexible thinking. It should be responsive to what you are looking for in the moment, both for like right now, for tomorrow, for next week, for summer planning, for next year's curriculum. And to that end, it should be personalized, right? It should not, there's no you don't subscribe to a list of 20 people that are already going to solve that problem for you, although there are ways to join PLNs with subscription once you decide that that's valuable, but no one's going to sell you like a list, like you would to an advertising firm. Make it match your needs, and no two people should be identical, though of course they're going to have huge Venn diagram overlaps. It should give you some practical tips. It should be something that really is actionable immediately, as well as theoretical, or sort of, practice pedagogy focus perhaps. And it should give you access to expertise. And we'll tell you some additional stories about that, but people who are really well learned in the thing you're exploring, offering you pearls of wisdom. That's a really good defining quality. Not the only one. I have some people that are like the intrepid explorers, and they're all about telling you about their failings and not about their expertise. And it's so great. I love reading their work. One that comes to mind for me is Cornelius Minor and his book, We Got This. He is hilarious. He's a New York City educator who is constantly talking about effectively failing forward. And he's amazing at what he does. But the story he tells publicly is really around these like, well, I had not the first clue what to do. And here's what I did in response. And through that sort of refreshing lack of expertise in certain areas, I find enormous reassurance and kind of like affirmation, which is a perfectly legitimate reason for him to be in my PLN. They should also offer, the members of your PLN should also offer real-time solutions and be, when needed, instantaneous. And I'll turn you to two other people that I think might be of interest in that way. One I mentioned before is Eric Scheninger. He's a principal. Another is Tom Murray, who is a director of innovation for a district and really is like charged with thinking about the new ways of teaching and learning. Not coincidentally, Kate and I work for the innovation team at the Department of Education, and our goal really is to look at new ideas. So his work, his professional assignment is for his district exploration of new ideas. And as a result, he's constantly sharing things that are new to him and therefore new to me. And then Mr. Matera, Mike Matera, who works for primarily ASCD, which is the American Society for Curriculum Directors, I believe. But they are really terrific about offering programmatic ideas. And because I'm responsible for developing professional development in my district, Mike and ASCD can be really helpful to think about how I'm going to sort of the practicality of offering adult education. I think I can speak for Kate when I said neither of us was familiar with the term andragogy until we met Emma Banks, our colleague who's at the Department of Education. So I think all the time about pedagogy and how we teach kids, but a lot of my work is andragogy, and I didn't know there was a word for it, which is how to teach adults. And if there's no other lesson you take away from today, it is that adults are students too. And if you are not meeting their needs, i.e. you are not meeting your own needs, you are really ignoring the fact that you have a learning style and you have skills and weaknesses that your professional learning network can respond to, but only if you take the initiative to personalize it. And in the case of ASCD, I know very well that I don't have the first clue. I didn't have the first clue about how to organize professional development for adults, but I have a much better idea now and a lot more to learn. And Mike is in my PLN because he offers that perspective. Another one of these really, I think, great infographics slash sketch notes from Sylvia Duckworth. Here, thinking about the specifics of how to grow your PLN and the sort of extended metaphor for the gardening aspect of it. You'll notice here that she references Z.E. Cool, Jacques Cool. And I will say that one of the really maybe one of the only rules of PLN is don't take credit for things that are not your own. Make sure you give credit where credit is due, and use the opportunity to share someone else's ideas as an opportunity to thank them for sharing it. That is the only area that I've ever seen people kind of get in trouble, so to speak, where people have said, actually, you should have probably credited that person. And so you'll see right here, golden rule, give as much as you take and make sure to thank people and give credit where credit is due. So since we're on asynchronous PD, I'll keep going, but feel free to press pause if you'd like to continue to read Sylvia's words there. And I'll turn it over now to Kate to talk a bit about how this all has worked for her. And here we insert Facebook for Twitter.
That's right. Yes. So, probably like a lot of us, I've been on Facebook for a really long time, and I used to use it for personal reasons. And now I almost exclusively now use it for my PLNs. It's really what keeps me on Facebook. I know a lot of people are like deleting their Facebook accounts and getting off of that platform. And I just refuse because it's where my PLNs live. And I would really, well, I like to geek out on instructional design. So I would be missing that piece of what I love to geek out on. So these are just some screenshots to show you kind of what's available on Facebook. Of course, mine are English focused for the most part, although now that I'm in a technology role, I'm in some technology PLNs on Facebook as well, but they can be as big and broad as something like Teachers Ask Teachers, which has, like 185,000 teachers in the group. And so it's kind of this bigger, broader view of education, a lot of big discussions around big topics, but also I can get as granular with my PLNs as specific texts. So I teach The Crucible, I teach The Great Gatsby, and when you know it, there's a PLN in existence for both of those texts. One has 3,000 members and one has almost 5,000 members. And so you can imagine the incredible information that I'm able to kind of glean from those PLNs and share myself. When I'm teaching those texts, I'm able to share what it is that I'm doing. There's a lot of great problem solving that's happening in those groups. And, I challenge myself with the content area of math because that's my personal weakness. And so when I'm thinking about developing professional development, I'm always thinking about math teachers. How does this apply to math teachers? How, why would this be valuable to math teachers? And so I just checked out like what PLN groups are available for math teachers on Facebook. There are a million of them. And so really, you use the search bar, in Facebook to easily start finding your PLNs. I just Facebook search math teachers and just came up with a massive list of all different entry points for math teachers and PLNs. So I know that there is a group on Facebook for you if you are still on Facebook, and it might be worth, if you are not on Facebook, create an account and joining in just for your PLN work. One of my favorite PLNs, and I just need to shoot Betsy an email because I have mentioned her in every professional development session I've done this year, I think, is run by my favorite educational podcaster, Betsy Potash. And she hosts Creative High School English, which you can see has over 21,000 members in it. So it's English teachers from all around the world. And we are sharing kind of all day, every day, problem solving and bouncing ideas off of each other all day. And to the right, I'm just showing you some of the features of some of these groups. This group utilizes their files in Facebook really well. So when people talk about this great idea that they've developed, this great assessment or this great activity, they'll just say, I posted it in the files for you so everybody has access to it. So we are sharing resources daily with each other, which is really great. And Jonathan mentioned, you will be able to find some subscription PLNs as well. And through this group, Creative High School English, and Betsy's podcast, Spark Creativity, I found her subscription group, which is called The Lighthouse, and it's specific to English teachers, although I think a lot of people could gather ideas from there, but you pay a subscription. And so I pay a subscription to access a website with all of her materials that she's creating for us. And then there is a private Facebook group that we are all in, all the subscribers are in, so we can kind of continue that conversation. So again, there are lots of different levels just on Facebook for PLNs.
One of the things you also talked about was the degree to which you feel welcome to take these ideas from one another, share them, modify them, and that going back to that concept of standing on the shoulders of others, just looking at this list, having been an English teacher before I became a tech integrator, I'd be like, I hate teaching archetypes. I know they're really important, but I was never taught them, and I always feel sort of out of my depth when I taught them. And looky there, two awesome, not just the slides themselves, but the notes to help me.
Exactly. And the people. So you can open those resources and go through them and then go back to the group and be like, hey, so-and-so, what's going on with slide number 3, right? I mean, you have access to the creator as well. Another feature that I love about Facebook and I'm obsessive about, and I have way too much of, is this saved feature. I save everything. It's a little bit of a obsession. It's like putting items in your cart without purchasing them. It's kind of satisfying in that way. So you can save posts, and the first arrow there on the very far left is pointing to what it looks like on my screen. So if I'm logged into Facebook on my laptop, down the left-hand side, I will be able to get to my saved lists there. In the middle, you can see that I'm in Creative High School English. Jeannie Jens has posted this great card deck. I would love to save it. I'm going to click on those 3 little dots at the top, which will open up this drop-down menu, and I'm going to click on Save Link, and you'll see it says, add this to your saved items. Yes, I will add it right to my cart. And on the right-hand side, you can just see this is a view of my lists. So you can organize basically your saved items into essentially folders. You name them whatever you would like, and then your items are right there. Because you are saving Facebook posts and they're kind of always a live link situation, there have been times where I've gone back into my saved lists and I've started going through them to glean ideas or to pull specific things out. And sometimes something's gone because maybe that group disappeared, or the person left the group, or they took down their post for whatever reason. So it is live. If there's something in there that you must have, at a certain time, it's great to maybe screenshot it or put it in Google Drive if it's a Drive file or that sort of thing. But this is how I kind of organize, you can see, my life, because there are I've got personal learning networks and professional learning networks all happening here on Facebook.
You mentioned too the dynamism, if that's the right word, of PLN. I'm fairly certain that this tech dependency one did not exist until recently.
Prior to our work together. Yeah.
I sucked Kate into the void of my venomous hatred for the way in which the tech industry unabashedly addicts, or certainly encourages, kids to misuse technology and overuse technology. And having done a presentation about this, lo and behold, I now can see evidence that I had influence on Kate's thinking, because she now has a list on tech dependency. And now we have this great conversation going between the two of us in person. We've presented about it. I started thinking about it from a whole different perspective, having to do with generational studies, which I'd given zero thought to and was really important to Kate. And that kind of exchange is all the more enriched. Not that I wouldn't be happy to tell Kate everything I know, but her own research then brings resources to me that I'm not familiar with, and sort of gives her a perspective to join in a conversation. And that kind of alchemy is where it really is, you start to see it happen. And I know, I feel like I'm describing how candy tastes. It's really good. It really just sort of becomes self-sustaining, and you can't not, because you think like, well, why would I try to do that on my own? Why would I, kind of take a guess when I could take such an educated guess? And it doesn't take the exploration out of it. It just takes the risk out, such that the first time you're engaging in a classroom context, or leading a session about it, you're all the more informed and you feel all the more confident about what you're talking about.
Yeah. This is Twitter. This is actually a personal learning network. So just to show you maybe just some different entry points depending on your comfort level with putting maybe yourself out there on social media. Like I said, I don't really post personally anymore on Facebook, but I have created, they kind of made fun of me the other day because it's just an X, but I have created a personal learning network just around the topic that I love to geek out about personally, of cryptocurrency. So I just created this anonymous account on Twitter, and I've used YouTube to find people who I was kind of watching on YouTube to do a lot of learning about the financial system, and I started following them on Twitter, and then of course that expands. I see who they're following, I see what they're hashtagging, I'm seeing, kind of all of that, and so I'm able to kind of curate my personal learning network that way as well. And all I do with this account is learn about this specific topic. I don't add people who aren't talking about this. I'm not following anything else. And in fact, this is a place where I lurk more than I contribute, which is also fine in a PLN. So I don't really tweet out anything. I mostly retweet things for my own benefit, which sounds a little selfish, but this is for my personal learning. So that arrow there, that's pointing to the green square made with the arrows. Yep. I'm retweeting it. And when you retweet something on Twitter, it shows up in your Twitter feed. And so what that does for me as a learner is it just stacks the really important things that I want to go back to on top of each other. I can also like them, which is that little heart button, which kind of does the same thing. When I'm in my profile, I can see all the posts that I've liked. So again, I'm not engaging really in conversation with these people, but I'm making sure to curate information for myself. And Twitter also has a bookmark, similar to what Facebook does with saved posts, except that I can't create all of those great folders and really sift things through that mechanism. It really just stacks them on top of each other. So occasionally I bookmark something, but I tend to just retweet so that it stacks for me in my profile. I do have people that follow me, but it's not anything that I'm looking for because like I said, it's really, this account is really just about me. And also in our session next week, I'm going to show you a very specific tech tool called Wakelet. And once you get that extension in your Chrome browser, it actually puts this little W in, it doesn't do it in Facebook, but it does show up in my Twitter and it does show up on my Reddit. And that is a site that's similar to Pinterest without all the ads that have really infiltrated it. I've kind of moved away from Pinterest and into Wakelet, but it will put it over in Wakelet, and then you can really curate and really decide how you want to organize and save things that are important to you that you're finding in your PLNs. So that's coming next week.
And one of the things we both noticed is that when I was preparing for this presentation, I was constantly consulting my PLN, and Kate was going to her Wakelet to present about Wakelet. And I think that's the ultimate endorsement of these concepts, that we use the tools to teach the tools. It seems, sort of self-evident that that is the endorsement that you make. If you need a ringing endorsement of why this is valuable, that's what we've found. So where do you start? The most important thing to remember is that this is not instantaneous. Your PLN, you might follow 100 people to get going if you wanted to, and then weed them out because you're going to make a lot of choices that you wouldn't later agree with. certainly one way to do it. Another is to create a small group. And what we're going to ask you to work on in a couple of minutes is pulling together a group of 10 who are informing you about something of interest that will give you access to organic growth going forward, but which will not be any kind of, and there is no end, there's no finish line here. Right? There's no moment when you become fully PLN'd. But as you think about this original group, the 10 people around your cabinet table, think about people that might be more sort of a trusted advisor, that expert who has a lot of knowledge. Maybe the confidant, the way that I experience Cornelius Minor sort of whispering to me, like, oh my God, I'm so confused. What do you do here? Then the geniuses, or the people that are just really inspirational in their crazy great ideas that expand your thinking. Maybe find some rabble rousers who people are like, that is not okay, that's not cool. For me in the DEI context, I work on our diversity, equity, and inclusion team at CAPE, and the committee's work is so profoundly informed by people's experiences outside of CAPE. And that is accessible to me in their thinking, and their sort of appropriate righteous indignation is there in my PLN because it offers a challenge to my thinking and reminds me of how this work is ongoing and so important. And then maybe some heroes as well, people that you're just like, wow, they are a phenomenal teacher. So maybe you have that John Spencer, for the two of us, where like pretty much anything he says is going to work in some way in my thinking, and having him there feels almost like a solid place I can go back to. Like when in doubt, ask John. The one thing I mentioned earlier is just to be aware of confirmation bias in your PLN, and especially once you begin to expand beyond the 10, it may be comforting to kind of pull close people who feel like they're affirming you, but that can also get you to a place where it's insulating. And the whole point of the PLN is to give you access to things you wouldn't have access to otherwise. So include, and my recommendation is including that people whose opinions you wouldn't necessarily hear in your day-to-day life, so that you have some challenges. And I mentioned the one in mine around charter schools. I refer you back here to Jenny Majera. She's the one I showed you the way to get to her page without being signed into a Twitter account. She introduced me to Teachers Teaching Teachers Tech. Another way to think about that initial step of your PLN is to look for fellow teachers who are really good at what they do and whose work with educational technology might inform your practice. And they're telling you from their classroom what you might try in your classroom. And that's where Jenny began. She is now, as a result of her PLN, her trajectory has taken her to a leadership position at Google in their education wing, and loves that work. She misses the sort of connection with students sometimes, but has felt like the influence that she has on people's practice and maximizing the capacity to use Google's educational tools is incredibly rewarding work. And so for me, she went from being a teacher teaching me tech from her classroom to mine to one of these sort of trusted advisor, genius level people that continues to be really invaluable. I don't think we have her listed here, but Alice Keeler, she might be on the next slide. Alice Keeler for Google Education Suite, anything to do with Google Classroom is no question the first place to start. I mentioned earlier that having a small group of trusted people that you know in person can be really valuable. So to remind you of who that is, I remind you of the fantastic music of TLC in the 90s, which in our case actually stands for Technology Learning Cohort. TLC is the small group of people who are like-minded, who you work with locally, who you know in person, and then with them explore and develop your PLN. So this might be your department, might be your teaching team, might be your grade level cohort, but you're looking for people who you know personally, Bob, Joe, and Sam down the hall, who are able to work with you on the process of developing your PLN. And you may end up, as I said, with some Venn diagram overlaps and some very different people that comprise your personal PLNs, But what will also happen is you'll gain resources from one another. And as simple as getting a Zoom together, sit quietly and work on developing your PLN, and then ask questions of each other, or do the same thing in a room, or connect with each other, as I suggested, like a district hashtag, where you have communicated with one another by tagging resources you found. And though there's no synchronous aspect of it, you're helping one another find resources through the equivalent of walking down the hall to their classroom and saying like, hey, have you seen Dana Majera and her work? The suggestion we're going to have for you today is to either look at an area of personal interest for your curriculum, or an area of growth for you using technology in your classroom. And my example would be how to teach digital citizenship. So that's part of my responsibility as the tech integrator. And I found these two very different people who create together a really wonderful basis for my teaching of digital citizenship. So as a tool, or sort of as a resource collection, I use Common Sense Education, but then for the actual instruction and the way to bring it to students and the way to make it a priority in your district and in your school, it's brought to me by these two people, Jennifer Lagarde and Nikki Robinson. Both of them are people I've now met in person. They're both pictured in that image of the 10 people on my PLN for libraries. They have terrific attitudes and sort of Jen describes herself as the part-time zombie slayer, because she thinks the most dangerous thing for school librarians and future is old school librarians who are really just sitting behind the circulation desk and checking out books. And she's like, that is not the way to keep your job. And it's in fact not what a librarian does. And she has this really, so she talks about killing the zombies, referring to them as the zombies, hence her description as zombie slayer. And her tagline is library girl. She tries to be kind of a superhero. She's very irreverent, she's hilarious to read, and just reminds me about the degree to which a little bit of edge and a little bit of like, no, I'm not going to accept that, I'm going to push back, can help you make progress in teaching digital citizenship in your schools. And she's the one who introduced me to the idea that we so often leave kids to navigate the internet on their own, yet we would never do that in any other area, right? Here is a book, learn how to read, or, here's a math problem, figure it out. That's not ever how we're going to start. And yet so often that is how we start with kids for digital citizenship issues. She asked the great question, how can we possibly justify that position? And we would never leave them to explore this especially with so much at stake on their own, and has now really passionately endorsed the idea that it's, as teachers, as schools, it's our responsibility to include that. And here is John Spencer, our man. Not only is he talented and thoughtful and unbelievably multifaceted, he can also draw, which just irritates me. But he has these great sort of image representations of his various ideas. And in this instance, you'll see that he's suggesting 16 ways to own, or sort of have a handle on the process of developing your own professional learning. And from these, I see a lot of echoes of what we talked about. So looking for resources and people to add to your PLN who might help you in any one of these areas. Unconferences is a synonym for EdCamp. And then he also suggests here the idea of community, and that really is the piece that surprised me, that it is not just a piece that surprised me. It isn't just developing a group of people who are for my benefit, but it's a group of people with whom I feel I have personal relationships and really do feel a sense of community, especially being the only tech integrator in my building, that I have a peer group and a sense that I belong to a larger purpose that I wouldn't get otherwise just in my own building. So now we undertake the work. We're going to ask you, as I said, to choose between developing a PLN for the use of educational technology in your classroom, or a PLN, and that is for this purpose, the first 10 members of your group, which relates to your subject matter. So Kate had mentioned looking for math teachers on Facebook. What we wanted to offer you was a bunch of entry points These are hashtags. These are people. Remember, the hashtag starts with number, and the people, the handles start with the @. These people are all over the board in terms of what they do. Some of them will be clear from their name. Many of them we've mentioned already. But what we're looking for is your opportunity. What we're looking to give you is an opportunity to start with these as jumping off places and see where they lead you. And if you find that it's useful, keep going. If you find it's not the way you want to go, back up and start again. But any of these will take you to either the person's tweets and retweets or posts or whatever is their format of sharing, or the hashtag will take you to a group of people expressing thoughts about that subject. The one of these that I noticed we haven't talked about is when the hashtag contains the word chat. So we have EdTech chat over here, PBL chat, which is project-based learning, I think. And then one of the ones, I'm not sure I put it up here, but, oh, here it is, TLAP, Teach Like a Pirate. It's a book. It's a hilarious gathering of people with a specific individual at the helm, and just a great series of books now and podcasts under that heading. So you don't actually need to teach, I don't know, robbery science. It just refers to the idea of being bold and sort of swashbuckling as you consider your methodology and your pedagogy. If it includes the word chat in the hashtag, it means there is also a time on Twitter, or I think this is pretty unique to Twitter, when the individuals who contribute meet, if they choose, synchronously in Twitter, and they have a chat, a conversation that goes oftentimes very rapid fire, but over the course of that half hour or hour, collects resources along a certain theme related to that concept. So project-based learning chat would be all through the week, people adding resources connected to that hashtag, but then periodically, and I believe that one is once a week as well, they will meet all together, meaning they all go on their Twitter accounts at the same time, 8 o'clock on Thursday night, and they do this mad rush of responses to a series of questions that a moderator has created. And it's the closest thing to a Facebook group. So Facebook groups exist asynchronously, but they have a moderator, they have someone sort of helping to direct the conversation. The hashtags that include chat have that same thing. I was the moderator of one-to-one tech chat for a while, which was intended for people in districts with one-to-one devices. So all through the week, we would tag posts with that hashtag, but then once a week, we had an hour-long series of questions related to which apps are you putting on your iPads to deal with social studies education in your one-to-one environment. And that week, that's what we would explore. Many of these chats bring in an expert to contribute or to sort of facilitate the conversation. Many of them also have leaders or sort of recognized moderators for them. But I wanted to just underscore the fact that if it has that, you have if it has chat in the name, you have the opportunity to explore it further and to sort of check in for a particular period of time. And if you click those with chat in it, it'll pop up on the left-hand side when the chat is held to join it and see what's going on. Word of caution, they are international frequently, so make sure you're checking the time compared to your time zone, because it's not always Eastern Standard focus. For those of you that are not at MDI or AOS 91 watching this, this is probably where you tune out, and we thank you so much for joining us. If you are listening or watching as part of your work with us at AOS and you just missed the session the other day, continue listening for a couple minutes while Kate takes us through your homework for next week.
All right, next week we are going to be looking at a specific instructional strategy that just ties really beautiful with what Jonathan was talking about today, and you'll see all those connections hopefully next week. But the strategy is around student curation projects and teaching our students how to become curators as a way to then become critical thinkers. And again, I know John Spencer John Spencer is everywhere, and wait until next week because he's just everywhere throughout our conversations. So we'll be looking at that next week, and we will also be looking at a tech tool to get your students curating content and to help you curate your own PLNs called Wakelet. So you do have some light homework in order to be set up and ready to go for our work together next week, and that is signing up for a Wakelet account. So I did put the instructions right here, kind of step-by-step how to sign up for your free Wakelet account. If you want to go ahead and dive into Wakelet and explore it a little bit, of course, feel free. However, that is not part of your homework. Your homework really is just setting up your account and setting up the Google Chrome extension. So again, I put the instructions here for you step by step on how to find that Chrome extension for Wakelet and how to get that up and running. If that, if you get stuck in either of those places, of course, reach out to either of us and we will help you get those set up. But that is what we need you to do so that you are ready to be off and running next week.
So just before we go, reminding you that you hopefully have walked away today with a good understanding of what a professional learning network is, why having one can be invaluable or is invaluable to your practice, and some initial steps in how to set yours up, how you want to get yours going. We didn't mention, and I meant to say, the way that you, especially if you choose not to create an account right now, you can do something as simple as create a Google Doc and just start dropping names and links to people in that. I've seen some people do it in a spreadsheet. And Kate's going to introduce to us next week Wakelet as a tool for students that also has the same function for adults, and you can use as a tool for your PLN. That the method by which you do that isn't important to us. We just want to make sure that what you're doing is some method of collecting these people so you can reference them going forward. The reason to do that through a social media account is because, as we've shown you, they are searchable. That is, you can go back through. So Kate mentioned retweeting for the purpose of being able to go back through her own feed and liking for the same reason. You can also, in Twitter, search within the people you follow. So if you have followed 25 people and you want to know more about constructivist teaching, what I did was search constructivist teaching in the Twitter search bar, but then I clicked on search people I follow. And that allowed me to limit it to these 200, I keep mine at 200 people that I trust to get answers. And as I said, lo and behold, took 90 seconds. So we will see you next week. And for those of you that are looking at the slides here, there is one more slide that will just reference for you of resources you may want to take a look at. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Kate and I are delighted to talk more about this with you personally. Just shoot us an email and we'll set up a time to jump on Zoom, whether that's how to set up your social media account to how do I refine my PLN. We are delighted to have that conversation. If there are people that you think would benefit as a group to talk about this as well, awesome, we'd love to do that. Please don't hesitate to let us know. And here's that final slide, which is just a series of resources that are about this process of developing the PLN to expand on what we talked about today. So there's a teacher challenge website where there's a self-paced course you can do in PLN development. So that'd be one way to do it if you'd like. Edutopia just has a nice sort of brief article about how you do this and why. That kind of summarizes what we've been talking about today. There is a really wonderful website called Cool Tools for School. And this particular post, I guess, is about how you develop a personal learning network with a specific focus. So they kind of talk about the methodology to get a robust group of people together around a particular subject of interest to you, especially if it's something you're teaching. So like the creative English teaching one, that kind of example. The next one I found and just thought was wonderful in that it is literally a dictionary of social media terms. So if someone says X about social media, it defines not only the platforms, but like terminology that's used in them. So you don't say things like, what is that talk tick? So it's just a really simple, but it's like a glossary effectively of social media as it applies to academia and teaching. And then the last one, best social networks for teacher PLNs, is just some more detail on that slide we showed you with all the various choices, advantages or disadvantages of any of those to consider as you're looking for how you want to do your, what resources you want to look to for your developing PLN. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And for those of you that are joining us next week, we'll see you again. Have a lovely afternoon.